this mentioned. I didn't really hear this mentioned at COP26 until the sort of last days in the Glasgow Climate Pact, which is sort of one of the final documents of the COP, and it said recognizing the need to ensure just transitions that promote sustainable development and the eradication of poverty and the creation of decent work and quality jobs. So this term, just transition, was mentioned. But what is it? What is just transition? Just to sort of to begin my presentation. Well, according to the International Labour Organization, greening the economy in a way that is as fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. Essentially, when we move from fossil fuels to green technology, how can that create opportunities, industrial opportunities, and ensure human rights for those on the ground? But it is important to say when we talk about just transition, that it's important to bear in mind it's a sort of catch-all term. So it's inherently plural and it's quite contested. So different stakeholders might have different definitions of it, but we want to sort of think about in the transition and the green transition, we want to be prioritizing labour rights, environmental justice, community rights, indigenous rights. So here's some statistics on just transition to begin. So solar energy requires 40% more copper per unit of energy than fossil fuels. One statistic is that we need to dig up as much copper in the next 50 years than we have done in the history of the Earth if we're to achieve net zero. Cobalt, this is this invaluable material which is mainly found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the world's poorest country. Cobalt production needs to increase 500% by 2050 to meet our clean energy targets. This is what's needed for batteries. So if you think about car batteries, phone batteries, all this sort of thing, in the transition, we're relying on electric technology. We need more batteries, and cobalt is needed for that. 54% of the global energy transition mineral projects, so this is the mining projects, where we need these invaluable materials for the transition, overlap with the indigenous or peasant territories. So if you think 54% of the land and the mining areas needed to achieve the green transition are happening on the lands of indigenous people. So we need to make sure that in this transition, they have a say. 4 environmental defenders are killed every week, and mining is identified as the most dangerous sector for defenders. So there's a lot of human rights abuses when it comes to mining these critical materials needed for the transition. So how do we protect those people? But we got to make sure that all those people who will be losing their jobs, who work in dirty industries, are retrained and are given the opportunities that this green transition can give. So in South Africa, in this coal region, 120,000 jobs are tied to coal mining and coal-based electricity. So how can those people benefit from the transition away from fossil fuels to green technology? Okay, so I said I was at COP26, but what's happened in between then on this term, just transition, which some of you might have only just heard about today? So we have this thing called the Just Transition Work Programme was formally established. It's an agenda item in the Paris Agreement, and it is supposed to be a guide to facilitate what this transition might look like. But in Egypt, it was an idea at Glasgow, and in Egypt it was decided that we'll make it into a work programme. And then in COP28, which was in the UAE, the programme was operationalised. So this was a 2-year work plan adopted, and the idea of it was to schedule annual dialogues and high-level ministerial roundtables. The idea of that is to make sure that information is shared on how we can best transfer to a green technology in a just way. Then we go to COP29 in Baku, which was not great. Parties failed to reach an agreement on how to move this beyond this 2-year work plan of meetings, essentially meetings between government, information sharing, information sharing ideas on how we can have this transition in a just way. So up to COP29, up to the last COP, we have a new system called the Just Transition Work Programme. And this is this formal way, which I've already really spoken about, sharing ideas on how to shift to a cleaner economy. These meetings take the form as high-level ministerial meetings. They take place twice a year. The last one was in Ethiopia at the beginning of this year. And they're the sort of forums for exchanging technical information, because obviously we need technology to achieve the transition. So that brings us to just before COP. Before every COP, there's a pre-COP, and that is 2 weeks in Bonn, in Germany, in the former buildings of the West German Parliament. And we got to Bonn in a fairly desperate situation because this 2 years had run out and we had no idea of how we were going to extend the Just Transition work programme. You will see here, so it comes to an end. And despite this Just Transition work programme being quite good, it initiated dialogue and information sharing. There was a feeling at Bonn that this could go further. No mechanism to track Just Transition progress. So there's a lot of people talking about Just Transitions, but how is it making progress? How are we tracking this to make progress? How are we holding it to account? The meetings are quite fragmented. They don't really relate to one another. We've all been in meetings for meeting's sake, and we kind of got a bit of an idea that this is what the Just Transition work programme was. So an idea was hatched by civil society organisations in Bonn, and we were part of those conversations. And the idea is this: BAM, the Bellum Action Mechanism. This was an idea of transforming this Just Transition work programme at COP30 to deliver on Just Transition. So what is it? And I'm sorry, Aidan, I've only just come to the aim of COP30 here. What were we arguing for? What was it? So the BAM is building on the GTWP, the Just Transition Work Programme, in a coherent, practical and globally coordinated framework. Wasn't very coordinated before, if you remember me saying. We want to have more focus on particular groups. So those are vulnerable populations, the indigenous and women, those who are impacted to a greater extent by the transition. We want to enhance finance. So it's all very good to talk to countries that you need to move, poorer countries, you need to move away from this profit-making fossil fuels, but we need to be essentially giving them money to develop these technologies, to buy these technologies for the green transition. So we want finance to be part of this new Bellum Action Mechanism, and we want there to be this mechanism to be held to account. So regular periodic assessments and feedback. So this is what we came in. We wanted BAM, which are these things. So we come to COP30. I went on this stupidly long plane to get to Brazil. And we have two sides arguing over the BAM. G77 and China want BAM. These are countries which are poorer nations, and they haven't really industrialized in many terms yet. So they think, well, if you want us to adopt this clean technology to save the world, we need to make sure that the transition is fair for us. In opposition of this is the European Union, the UK, Canada and Australia and Japan. And essentially these are people who think climate change is already costing too much, and they're really scared about this idea of climate finance. However, 80% of the world is represented by the G77 plus China, this group who want BAM. So how did we push BAM as a Jesuit delegation? We spoke to the delegates. So this is myself and another Jesuit and some other people speaking to the Minister for Climate Change of Ireland. Ireland, part of the EU, one of the countries against the ban. So we held meetings with them. Held meetings with the Holy See probably every second day. I'd have a bilateral meeting, or a couple of us would have a meeting with the Holy See delegation. The Holy See is a COP member because the Vatican is a country. It's a COP party. And they did make some interventions on the just transition mechanism. So that was good. And with the UK, but the UK, when it comes to COP, are a bit more cloak and dagger. So this is kind of phoning my civil servant friends and trying to WhatsApp the delegation. What else did we do? We pressed the presidency, and here's a Jesuit. This is the rector of the Pontifical, I don't know, university in Brazil. He's a Jesuit, and this is him handing our demands, including that on BAM, to the COP president, the most important man in the building. And in the corridors, we advocated for this sort of thing. The Justice and Mining Network, which is one of the advocacy networks of the Jesuits, we had a panel, and on this panel we had Indigenous people represented. There, Toussaint is a Jesuit from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and he lives in Lubumbashi, where 70% of the cobalt in the world is mined. So he was represented there at this event, and he spoke very powerfully. And we had a press conference where we spoke to the media about our demands. So we spoke to delegations, we pressed the presidency, and we were kind of there on the sidelines also making the arguments. So the COP30 outcomes, were we happy with it? Yes, so actually BAM was achieved. Parties decided to develop the just transition mechanism. This is in the final text. Obviously, this is the start. I mean, we've only really been talking about BAM since earlier on this year, but I think a lot of countries saw that fossil fuels wouldn't make the last text, so the EU and the UK essentially gave in. They thought something needs to come out of COP, so they gave their blessing to the just transition work mechanism. But that was after a lot of persuasion towards the UK and the EU, with the countries arguing against this mechanism. The negatives, fossil fuels did not feature in the final text. That's not unusual. Fossil fuels has only ever featured in the final text of COP twice. So it's not unusual, but it's disappointing because someone said it's a bit like having a fire brigade conference without talking about water. So it's very annoying. And this annoyed some countries so much, namely the Netherlands and Colombia, that they've sort of given up on the COP process when it comes to phasing out of fossil fuels. And they're going to host a kind of bilateral meeting in April, where people who want to work on fossil fuels outside the UNFCCC can discuss that in Colombia. Colombia is a very progressive government, and the Netherlands helpfully doesn't have a government. So the civil servants are doing it. And this is us. We were 20 people on the Jesuit delegation, 9 Jesuits and 11 lay collaborators. And we were all there arguing on our different functions, but it was very much a unified campaign. And I think we were recognized. We would go to the Catholic meetings and they would say, "Oh my God, look how many Jesuits are here." You know, it's really, I got the feeling at COP that apostolic preference for is very much very close to a lot of people's hearts, and it's very important. So I hope that's okay for you, Aidan.
Terrific. Thank you very much. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be. Thank you so much, Colm. And we'll move on now to Daniela, who's our final speaker. And again, she'll be talking about her expectations and her hopes for COP30, whether they were realized, and what she got out of the experience.
Thank you so much. So just to introduce myself, I am Daniela Alba. I'm the advocacy coordinator for the Social Justice and Ecology Secretariat of the Society of Jesus. I'm speaking to you live from Rome, from the Curia. And I want to stray a little bit away because I believe that my colleagues already spoke extensively about, the very, I guess you can say, diplomatic side of the COP. And I want to go to the heart of the matter, which is that as the Society of Jesus, we do not yet have a solidified presence to the UNFCCC. We have many charisms within the Apostolic Social Apostolate in the body that work closely with and have been a part of the COPs for many, many years. For example, the ESSC, amongst others. And so, I think it's important to emphasize that this was the first time that the Society of Jesus attempted to do a global campaign at the intersection of social justice and ecology in the form of the Jesuits for Climate Justice, Faith in Action at COP30 campaign and its efforts. So I really want to speak about that, because I think that a lot of people always ask, how did that come about? How did that pan out? And what happened there? So my main reflections, and I'm speaking, I want to preface this by saying I'm an indigenous woman from Colombia, of mixed descent. The COP for me personally was not anything new. There's a reason why there's been 30 years of talk and very little to show for. And I think that this was just the proof that when you go to the heart of Mother Earth, the Amazon, the second lungs of the earth, you really hear her and you have no choice. So I think what a lot of people leave out of the experience is that many times during the conversations throughout the day in the blue zone, which was extremely exclusionary, as I'm sure many of you saw how militarized it was after the quote unquote clashes that were had with local indigenous populations that were left out of the conversation after many promises. And so it was funny because in this is exclusionary zone, because it is very elitist and it is very hard to get into. Mother Earth would interrupt every single conversation at least one time a day with severe thunderstorms and rains. And many people would often say, wow, let's just wait until, it kind of stops the rain. I'm not sure what this is trying to tell us. And I think actually he was speaking very loud and clear, which is that we cannot exclude and we cannot just tokenize and, I guess showcase the indigenous peoples of the world, which safeguard 80% of biodiversity while making up less than 10% of the world's population without consequences from the very place that it safeguards, which is our common home. And so I thought that this was something that many people were not talking about. The other thing that I think was not mentioned was that actually the fossil fuel industry was very much present, both lobbying but also paying for the COP. I'm sure you all heard that the building caught on fire the second to last day due to the lack of quality of the facilities that it was being hosted in. And I don't think that that's a coincidence because I think this COP really exposed the deep-seated contradictions that make up the Conference of the Parties. And I think that in its 30th year, it's not only essential to talk about them, but to really bring them up to light. And that's why I put this picture that I took on the very last day, walking out of the center for the last time and seeing the statue, which I'm sure you've all seen going around social media. And so this is really the reflection of what my personal experience at COP was. I believe that the delivery not only fell short of many of the calls of the campaign, as my colleague Patricia already mentioned, but that it really showed us that climate action cannot just be something done by the very few that don't really live the consequences of it in the first place, but that it really needs to be a widened process. And I believe that Indigenous people, civil society, and the Gender Action Plan, for example, are vital signs that we are pushing forward. And the Society of Jesus has a critical role in this, especially as it is a body that is known for its educational efforts and the accompaniment of the people on the ground, whether that is Indigenous people, women, children, and the sorts. So I believe that this second takeaway, the civil society played that key role at COP30, not only in the March of the Peoples, the Summit of the Peoples, the Tapiri Ecumenico, but also in showing up and showing out unapologetically and consistently, which is the kind of energy we need right now, because this is not a matter of years anymore. It is really a matter of minutes, seconds. And in many parts of the world, especially Asia Pacific right now, and in other regions, we see these effects. We hear about them all the time, and we cannot continue to ignore them. The third is that the Society of Jesus completed this first campaign as a body, and it was a fulfilling experience, but it also showed how vital it is to have these spaces created for religious congregations, for the lay collaborators, and for communities of faith. And of course, the work continues and is needed now more than ever. What does that mean? Well, we covered many areas. As Colm already mentioned, we had the energy transition, critical minerals and finance, views from civil society panel in the CAF pavilion. And we also covered the Blue Zone extensively with Radio Amar y Servir, which is the radio hosted by the Society of Jesus and one of only 3 faith-based radios that was given credentials to the press room in the Blue Zone. This is an honor, this is an achievement, and I believe that they did an incredible job of following not only the negotiations, but covering each and every one of the spaces. We also had the Tapiri Ecumenico covered by many of the social centers in Latin America, essentially OLMA as well. They followed along and they participated in many of those interfaith conversations that were necessary in order to collaborate further than just the COP. We also were present in marching in the People's March. We had all of our collaborators there marching, calling for climate justice alongside the people of the territory. And then we also participated actively in the People's Summit as the Letters to the Earth Education Initiative, which produced more than 98,000 letters and drawings from across the apostolic body of the Society of Jesus, from students all the way from first grade to the university, were featured, and you can see just a little preview of that with Father Agnaldo. And then, of course, we were present also in the Green Zone, where many panels and discussions were also hosted with many of the works within the apostolic body. So, of course, what does this mean? We showed up, we showed out. We had about 35 different people from around the apostolic body covering more than 5 continents. And we were also coordinating behind the scenes what I call the arduous work. So the outputs and the collaboration that happen, and some of the people are here on this call, such as Richard, who blessed our daily bulletin daily with the highlights from the negotiations. We also had our Climate Heroes series as a part of that, which elevated, again, these voices of the children. Why is that so important? Well, first of all, they are inheriting the future, and they are the future. Second, because most of the time they're given very small and tokenistic spaces within the conversations and very few consultations where they can actually express their fears, their needs. And so we made sure that their voices were key and central to the campaign and to the communications outputs of the campaign within the daily bulletin. I'm sure most of you saw, if you were following along, the press conference we held on the very last day, as the second to last day as well, which Colm, Patricia, and I participated in alongside Cristobal Emil Fork and Father Roberto Jaramillo, who is the Secretary of Social Justice and Ecology of the Society. Again, we had Radio Amar y Servir that was transmitting live from pre-COP all the way to the post-COP. Incredible work. I really highly recommend, if you have not seen, to go and look at a lot of those outputs. And of course, we turn to the spiritual component, which we cannot ignore. As the Society of Jesus, the impetus behind following the universal apostolic preference, number 4, which is the care of our common home, also calls us to bring spirituality in spaces that can often be just political and just diplomatic. And so the prayer guide, which was, I would like to say, a work of love and collaboration, was brought together and accompanied the process from beginning to end. Luckily, we also had a great opportunity to meet not once, but twice with our delegation, but also with faith-based collaborators and other collaborators. We opened up the invitation to come and meet us at both the Jesuit community and also the sisters' home, which was the Sisters of Santa Ynez, who were hosting us there in Belém do Pará. And we had moments of beautiful sharing, but also spiritual gathering and reflection, which I believe helps sustain you because those spaces can be very draining, from the blinding lights to the blasting of cold air. And then the contrast of walking outside where there's like 75% humidity and around 38 degrees daily. So we have this beautiful little contrast to keep us grounded, but also to keep us going in spaces that I firmly believe are designed to exhaust you day in and day out. So what are the considerations I want to make and put forward? First is that the next steps are crucial. I believe that not only is COP30 just a moment, but that on our way to COP31 and all of these processes and among the accompaniment that we can offer as the Society of Jesus, we must continue to work together. And this is something that not only Father Roberto emphasizes, but also Father General Arturo Sosa, to unite efforts, goodwills, and resources in order to really foster a future where we can walk as one. And I believe that this is essential because if Belém taught us anything, is that when you look at communities that safeguard Mother Earth, safeguard her critical minerals and resources, the one thing we can all say is that they work together continuously. And so I believe this is a very strong call to action. Obviously, the collaboration amongst the delegation, this was the first time. So there's many lessons. We're still debriefing. We're planning a meeting, internal meeting to go over the process. And I believe that in terms of communication, coordination, and actions, we can always improve, but we really showed up and we showed out. And as Patricia said, I believe people really recognize that. And Colm also mentioned this, every time we would go anywhere, people would say, oh, here come the Jesuits, so it was a beautiful thing to witness, but also to be a part of. As a woman, being a lay collaborator for the society and being also the face of much of the social media was a funny experience because people would come up to me and say, oh, I thought Jesuits were only men. And I was like, yes, they are, but they are also men who are very open and always willing to collaborate. And this is something that I take with me, not only as a testament to the legacy of Laudato Si, but also the compromise we hold with those that we accompany. And so I believe that this is also a huge sign of hope. And as we are in the Jubilee of Hope, closing it out, but we're still in the Jubilee of Hope, I think that this is something that should push us further. Of course, the external collaboration, whether that is within the faith-based sector and beyond, is also something that we are strongly trying to strengthen and to walk forward with. And in Belém, we have the opportunity to also have dinners, meetings, and bilateral conversations, not only with the Holy See, but also with a whole other host of actors within the COP spaces, not just in the Blue Zone, but also in other zones as well. And of course, keeping us rooted in faith, because I believe that this is really the spiritual mission goes way beyond just a political or policy process. It goes to the heart of the matter. And it is that none of us here can live without Mother Earth, but most certainly she can and has lived without us. And if that is not something that roots us in the reality, I don't know what else is. Personally, I was present at COP speaking about climate displacement as someone who holds lived experience, but is also working in this field. And comes from Colombia, a country that has one of the highest indices, not only of climate displacement, but internal displacement in the world. And as Colm kindly mentioned, we now have been granted, after almost 70 years of civil conflict, the ability to have a government that really gives voice and elevates our mission, not only as civil society, indigenous peoples, but also as a body, a human body. And so we will take that with us. What I can share with you is that I felt like I repeated myself over and over. And while many people clap for you, they take pictures with you, they want to do interviews with you, at the end of the day, none of that fell into the negotiation spaces. And not only did it not fall into the negotiation spaces, but it was also backtracked on. So, for example, the Gender Action Plan was something that even the Holy See was not in accord with. So it's interesting because many of the lay collaborators that make up part of this wonderful work are women. And we cannot ignore the fact that we are disproportionately affected by not only the effects of climate change, but social injustice. And lastly, I just want to say that as the Society of Jesus, we cannot unmarry social justice and ecology. So showing up in those spaces for me and being on panels and speaking in different spaces also meant bringing up the uncomfortable truths and conversations, which is that it is highly hypocritical to have actors who create pollution through warfare sitting at decision-making tables while the communities that are suffering those social just injustices in the world do not even have a consultative role and can sometimes not even observe the negotiations themselves. And I believe that not only do we have a moral imperative to educate and to continue accompanying these processes, but to continue elevating those voices and those realities, because if we cannot disrupt the system and we cannot question things in a healthy way, we cannot move forward towards climate justice. So in conclusion, I just want to show you some of the highlights which you've already seen. We brought the voices of 4 incredible climate champions with the help of the ESSC, but also with Fe y Alegría International. They are here in some of the pictures. We were also very attentive to all of the spaces, and we were well aware that everything that we were doing was just part of one big, huge, overwhelming body of work that was going on bilaterally, multilaterally, in all the ways you can think. And I believe that with that being said, I want to end my intervention sharing with you, again, the voices of those children. And so I want to read to you a letter that comes from St. Xavier in Ohio in the US. And it reads, "Dear delegates, I am writing to express my concern about our common home. When I look at our common home, I see a struggle, one that is both beautiful and at the same time ugly. Experiencing the fullness of earth is a call that God has for all of us to do and experience. In my life, looking around the earth now is relaxing, enjoyable, and provides a sense of calm that I believe God intended to be there when we look at his creation. To breathe the fresh air, feel a cool breeze, and see nature is to see God. Increasingly, we hear more stories about the toll that humanity has taken on our common home, seeing oil spills in our oceans, fire in our forests, desertification in our grasslands, and melting ice at our poles. Makes me nervous for our future. I see a future where my generation and those after feel the full impacts of our mistakes now and our reluctance to change. I see a world too disincentivized to do the right thing, but perfectly content abusing our common home for the luxuries of our everyday lives. I see now a world so shaped by the beauty of God's own touch, on the brink of destruction by his own creation. When I see earth, I see ugliness in the shift towards an uncaring world, but I also see beauty in the struggle that so many have taken to protect our common home from the impacts that we have taken on it. While damage has already been done, it is not too late to reverse the worst effects humans will have on our planet. Therefore, I urge you and your fellow delegates to agree on strong policies that encourage people to live in a more suitable way for our common home's sake. Sincerely, Eddie Khoury, who is a junior, 16 years old, in the Global Perspectives class of Miss Therese Bauer at St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the US. And so this is one of the drawings comes from all the way from Ecuador, and our students from Fe y Alegría. And I believe that its message is very loud and clear. It reads in Spanish: please don't destroy our home. It is our common home. Every tree that you cut down is something that you are taking away, something more that you are taking away. And so I think that the message is clear. Where do we go from here? As you can see, the collaboration was huge among the apostolic body, but we have to and must continue to walk together for and with our common home. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniela. That was really so informative, but also so stirring and absolutely fascinating.